Okay, for this project I'm going to walk you through the whole process and you'll see me painting along with you. Throughout, go ahead and pause the video as you need. Make sure you get all of these supplies and then tape down your watercolor paper. Now I put the tape on my jacket before putting it on the watercolor paper just so that the tape will pick up some of the fibers from my jacket and then prevent it from sticking too much to the actual paper. All right, so I first start off with creating some sort of skyline where the mountains meet the sky. Yours doesn't have to look exactly like this, but you want some space at the top where you create a sky. Then I want to create the top of my bridge. For this, I just used my little watercolor paper that I'm going to use to do testers to see if I'm getting the right colors of paints. And then I use that as kind of a straight edge. You could use a ruler. You don't even have to use anything at all if you don't want. Then I draw the arch underneath the bridge. And as you go, you might change some of these angles. You might change some of what you're drawing. I think I drew this line a little crooked. It looks crooked to me, but I'm not redoing it to fix it. But just make sure your line is straight. Then I just created the edge. Just make sure the right side of the bridge is about the same size as the left side of the bridge. Doesn't have to be exact, but if it's off, it'll be kind of noticeable. Right, and so this is where the land is going to reach the bridge. And so on the left side, I'm just going to create a hill. We're going to kind of block out that area in the front. That way we don't have to worry about painting it. You could add more stuff in the front if you wanted to, but you don't have to. Now I just drew some lines to see where the edges of the path that go underneath the bridge, where those are at. Maybe it's a lake, or maybe it's a water runoff, a little river. That's up to you. And then for underneath the bridge, we have to add some depth. So I just draw a line, and then I draw the same angle that I did for the arch, at least the beginning of it, to end that part of the arch. As you're doing this, you also want to draw in some shadows, wherever the shadows are going to be. There's going to be shadows from trees as well. In this case, I don't draw the shadows from the trees, just because it's such a light color, and then I can change it as I go. And then when I looked at this, I decided, this arch is not quite the size I want. Maybe I want to see a little bit more of what's behind it, so I'll change that. Maybe I want to change the angle of the hills and what they block off or what they don't block off. So I decided I want to change the arch a little bit, make it a little bigger. Alright, so we've got our background, we've got a few things in the middle ground. Now we want to add some trees. I'm going to add one tree that's closer, where I add more detail to that tree. And then eventually I'll add some other trees further back, and then after that we'll even add some more trees. Now, the idea behind drawing trees is we're not going to try and create all of the limbs that a tree would normally have. We're going to simplify it a little bit. Instead of having a bunch of limbs, we're going to, the main tree branch out into, I don't know, in this case, we're doing 2 main branches and then a couple branches from there. And then maybe if you look at it and you're like, oh, I want to add a little bit more, you can, if it doesn't seem full enough. But really, we want to try and simplify how many branches we add, at least for this project. And then as you add the branches, make sure they gradually go from somewhat thick to slightly thinner. Don't make it go from really wide to really skinny, where they look kind of like triangle shapes, because that's not what trees really look like. And I would suggest going out in nature, looking at some trees, deciding, oh, what do they look like? Maybe take some photographs and use those as a reference as you start your drawing. Now these trees that are a little further back, they're going to be smaller. The further back they go, the smaller they are. Now if we were drawing the bottoms of these trees, the further back something goes, the higher it's going to be on the page, at least where it starts from, if you're looking down at it. So I've drawn out all of my trees. Now I'm going to add the blue background for the sky. And we'll generally go from back to front. The reason we drew out all these trees is this is going to be a snow scene, so there's going to be, wherever the trees are, we don't want to paint them yet. We want to leave those white so that when we start painting, we'll be able to see where the snow is. So for this blue, I decided to use a regular blue and a little bit of an aqua blue. So on your palette that you have, or at least you should have picked up, it's the fourth one down, is the aqua blue. I made it a little bit stronger. You want this to be fairly light. And the way I paint around these trees is I decided to paint along the edges and then fill in the center area. And when I'm painting along the edges, I made sure it's plenty wet. That way I can use that paint to spread around. If there's a time where, as you're painting these edges and your paintbrush accidentally covers part of a branch, that's okay. Still leave the rest of the branch blank, and then when we start painting it, the branches, we can just paint those areas brown so that you don't notice it. You just think, oh, that's a part of the branch where snow didn't quite get to. To make things easier for you, I sped up this video so that you can watch it all the way through, then actually do that action or paint that area, and then you can watch another section, then paint that area, watch another section, then paint that, just so that you're not sitting there watching every stroke. Now I want to create a color for the mountains. So what I do first, I always add some water to my palette first. And in this case, I'm just using a board just so that it shows up better on camera. Otherwise, I have that clear plastic and doesn't show up very good. So for this mountain, I want it to be purple, but not a pure purple. So I want it to be like a bluish purple and somewhat grayed out. So I added blue and I added purple. And then I do a little tester to see what it looks like. If you want it to be duller, you add the complementary color. So in this case, complementary color to purple is yellow. So I could add a little bit of yellow to this and maybe even a little bit of orange, and then I will get a muddier color. So for me, that's the color I'm looking for. I don't want it to be a blue, I don't want it to be a purple or a blue purple, so I added a little bit of yellow to kind of muddy it out a little bit. And as you're painting, if you start painting on your paper and you realize, whoa, this isn't the color I want, you can pause right there and then mix some more colors. Maybe you want it to be a stronger color. Maybe you want, in this case, I wanted more purple color to it. I actually wanted to strengthen it more as I started painting it, it was so light that I was like, you know what? It's not going to look like that mountain is in front of the sky. It's going to look like the sky is in front. So if you're looking at mountains, and in this case we're trying to just create that distant effect, you might want to make your mountains slightly darker than your sky. That's one reason I said keep the sky really light. Alright, so I darkened it a little bit. I didn't darken it a lot. Make sure as you're painting, once you get towards the sky, you want to make sure that the sky is dry. So you saw me there touching it just briefly with my finger just to make sure it's dry. If you don't do that, your purple is going to mix with that blue sky. Now as you're going in between some of these branches, if you dip into the paint and then paint those little tiny sections, you're going to have a really strong purple color. To avoid that, you paint just a little bit and then add those little sections. And when you create that section of purple in your palette, you want to make sure that you have plenty of paint to go the whole way. If you don't, you'll run out, and then you'll have to try and duplicate that color, and it might be tricky to get the exact same color. If there's areas that it's kind of bleeding a little bit too much, you can get a paper towel and just lightly touch it where it's really thick paint or puddling up. That's what I did there. Alright, next I'm going to do the bridge. When I do the bridge, I don't want the purple mountain to be wet anywhere I touch, but there's going to be a layer of snow on top of the bridge, so I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap as I start painting, so I don't have to wait for that purple to dry out completely. And then for this, the bridge color, I'm going to do a lighter color, desaturated with a little bit more water than normal. I'm just using yellow, a yellow orange, and a teeny bit of red. And if I want it to be slightly muddier, then I'll add a little bit of the complementary colors, which would be blue and purple. But when adding those complementary colors, add just teeny bit. Do a little tester. And then once you've got that brown you want, then you can go paint that first layer. Notice I leave a little gap at the top of this bridge. That's really important as you're painting this. You don't want to accidentally cover it up so it looks like there's no snow on top of the bridge. On the right side, you saw that I left a little gap. Snow's not going to necessarily be on the side of the bridge, but I left that little gap because I wasn't sure if the purple was all the way dry. So I left that gap, and then later I can paint that in. Now one thing I did for this bridge is after I painted it, I went over it again just to add a little bit more depth, doing the wet on wet technique. And then I dabbed it with a paper towel so that I could start mixing a more concentrated color. It's not fully dry, it's still got a little bit of moisture to it, but then I add this next color. Now with this concentrated color, you don't have to do it perfect, but one thing I like to do is just do horizontal strokes from left to right, and then occasionally I'll go around an edge to lengthen it out. Really what you're doing is trying to create more contrast in this bridge going from light to dark in different areas, but you're also trying to mimic what might actually be there as far as parts of the bridge. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. But as you do this, you can go over with multiple colors. You can make a more concentrated brown by adding a little bit of red. You can let those overlap a little bit. Maybe you keep them separated. In this case, I let it overlap a little bit so that we have variation in color. Now I knew that the purple area was dry, so I went up against that side too. And here I just got a concentrated color and then let it blend naturally. Add a little bit more water because it wasn't naturally blending totally. So, alright, so now that bridge has more depth to it. So right now I'm making a concentrated brown. This is going to be for the branches. I'm just using yellow, red, orange, a little bit of blue, some black, because I did want to kind of deaden it slightly. Now it was just a little bit. If it's a little too dark for you, add more yellow. If it's a little too light for you, add more blue, until you've got a nice strong color that you want. In this case, I decided I want it to be more of a reddish tone, so I added more red. We're going to choose one side. It could be the left side or the right side. I'm going to choose the left side of where the snow has blown onto it. And then on the right side is where I'm going to add more of the tree branches themselves. Once I've got a nice concentrated color, and you don't have to be perfect about this, but I just add it to the right side of each branch. And then maybe I'll extend some of those branches out, just being careful not to make it go too wide or too narrow. You can paint both sides of the branch just to show where the snow has kind of stuck onto the branches. That's fine. On the background, that's when we can decide to change a little bit. Like maybe we want to widen out some of the branches because they don't line up quite right. Or maybe we want to, if we made a mistake and painted through, we would, with blue, maybe in those areas we would just paint that a solid brown color. And you'll also notice the trees that are further in the background behind the bridge, I did a slightly more diluted brown. Then I created a more concentrated or a desaturated brown to add some branches that are, or trees that are further back. Now with these branches and trees, you're not going to see all of the details, and I'm doing that on purpose because we want to create this atmospheric perspective where the trees that are further back have less detail, and these trees that are in the background, we're painting over the purple, so you'll kind of see through somewhat. So I let the painting dry again. You don't always have to let it dry. I was letting it dry in between uploading video and editing. So now I'm creating a green. Right above the yellow is a really dark green. And then with that, just be careful not to add too much. And if you don't want to be so saturated, you want to be more of a brownish color, just add the complementary color. So in this case, complementary color to green is red, so I added a little bit of red to make it more of a brown color. And you get to decide where to put these pine trees, but what I'm doing is just lightly dabbing on to the surface of the area that I'm painting. And when it dries, it will kind of create the look that a pine tree might have in the distance. Now, if you wanted to add a tree that's further out in the distance, all you do is just dilute the green a little bit more, and it will appear to be further away. And I like to paint it, draw out or paint where the tree is going to be, and then I like to dip my brush in the color itself and then lightly dab it in a few areas. That's basically the wet on wet technique, where it will spread that color in that one area. Again, when you do a tree that's closer to you, you're going to add more details, and in this case it's going to be larger. So I decided I want this tree to really stand out, because I have a tree on the right side that stands out a lot more. So might as well make a pine tree on the left side, make it stand out. And here you see me dabbing a few different colors. Now, because it's closer to me, I'm going to see more details. So I decided, instead of just leaving it with those colors, I'm going to dip my brush in a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, and then lightly tap it so that that contrast of greens shows up a little bit more. Wherever that yellow is, that's where the sun is hitting it. Wherever I add a little bit of blue, even though it's going to mix with the green, it's going to be a bluish green. Those will show as shadows. Now I decided there's not enough pine trees, so I'm going to add another tree, but this one I'm going to do even more diluted. Looked a little bit too diluted, so I might add a little bit color. And see, this one's further back in the background. Alright, so it's all dried. Now I'm going to add the snow in the foreground. And you'll notice, looking at those trees, the lighter ones appear to be further back, the darker ones appear to be closer. Now as I add shadows, you can kind of decide where you want to add shadows. I decided to add some shadows along the edge of the snow drift, and then from there you're going to add shadows to trees, and just decide, maybe there's a tree to the left off to the side a little bit, and then follow the angle of the hill and follow the angle of that river bottom, or that path, whatever you want to decide that is for you. And then just like you did with the trees, you're going to follow those angles and then just have them divide out a little bit. I decided my blues were just too light, so I added a little bit more concentrated color to it. So right there's a little ledge. That's why I skipped a little section. It doesn't line up perfectly. I did that on purpose so that it gives the illusion that it's going down a little dip, that shadow. And then whenever you get to those edges of that river bottom, you're going to slightly change the angle of the shadow, because the shadow is going to follow along whatever angle it's sitting on. Maybe draw some shadows up there in the background of some trees. Alright, now when creating the shadows underneath the bridge, I decided to go with blues, purples. I want it to be kind of a brownish blue. I even added a little bit of black to it. I normally say avoid black. Like don't use it if you don't have to, but in this case I did want to use it. I looked at that shadow and I'm like, it's not quite dark enough, so then I just got black on my brush. Darkened it up a little bit. Now when you look at the painting in real life, you can see a lot more blue. The camera didn't pick that up very well. Alright, I let it dry and then I erased all of the lines that I didn't want to keep. And then to any areas that I accidentally made a mistake of painting, I used a wet brush to clean up those. I added more detail to the pine tree and to the tree in the foreground. Just because the closer something is to you, the more details it will have. The further away it is, the less detail. So here I added another layer of brown on the pine tree. I added another layer of, those darker greens, and then on the bridge itself, I decided to add some more layers there. And I didn't show it in the video earlier, but notice what I'm doing here is I'm just painting little sections and letting the paint kind of absorb itself. I decided the foreground was a little bit bland, so I decided to add some little grass coming up. But since there's lots of shadows from the trees, I've got to add shadows to the grass as well. And as you look at your painting, just say, okay, are there any other details I need to add? And then, like all paintings, make sure you sign your painting. You'll peel off the tape, take a photograph, and then you'll submit it on canvas. So this is how my painting turned out. Thanks.